Have you ever had that moment when you knew there was something that you needed to do? There was a passion you had in life that you needed to follow, and you finally figured it out right at that moment, but you didn't know how to get it. I happened to be a school teacher for 28 years, and about 6 or 7 years ago, I was in my classroom teaching elementary school band. And the office next door to my classroom was my friend Linton. And Linton said to me one day when we were having lunch together, he said, "Bearj, you should be a motivational speaker." But what Linton didn't know is I never told anyone that I wanted to be a motivational speaker. I hadn't told a soul. I hadn't told my family. I hadn't told anyone. So the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The hairs on my arms stood up because he told me something that I had always wanted to be, and he told me that I could be it from saying that to me. Well, what had happened was when I was in my 20s, I was watching TV one day. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was one of those days that I finally had off. I was a high school band director then, working 24/7, 365. I didn't have any time to myself except for this one Sunday I had some time. And I was flipping through the channels like most people do, and I landed on PBS. I don't watch PBS. I don't know about you, but I never watch PBS. But this one particular day, there was a gentleman speaking. And as soon as I heard him talk, I couldn't turn away. I kept watching him and watching him. For 90 minutes, I watched him. And it was like he was not just speaking to me, but speaking about me. And while I watched him talk and listened to him talk, I envisioned myself as him. Have you ever heard of Les Brown? Les Brown is today one of the top motivational speakers in the world. This was his big break on PBS. I didn't know it at the time. I was just seeing the speaker. And this is in the early 90s. We didn't have the type of electronic equipment that we have today. So I couldn't look up when that show was going to be on next. I looked for it every single day. I couldn't find it again. Until I started to find his books and I started to read his books. And when I did that, when I read his books, I used those as a way to empower myself to, instead of being a speaker, because I was afraid to take that leap of faith, to become a success coach for my students. So that's what I did every day when I taught my students. I'd have 130 band members in front of me, and I envisioned myself as their success coach. I envisioned myself as Les Brown on a stage with lights on me, with a screen on each side and a microphone here, and an audience of 1,000 people. That's where I was when I spoke, because that's what I wanted to do. I did that every day for the next 20 years. When I began teaching elementary school, I was doing the same thing there, and that's what Linton heard. And he said to me, "You should be a motivational speaker." And what he did for me that day was something that was absolutely amazing. He said, "I teach at Strayer University at night, and I want you to come speak to one of my classes." You see, the other thing he didn't know was that I had wanted to be a speaker, but I had held myself back because I didn't know how. I didn't think I could. I didn't know how to make it happen. I didn't know the people. I didn't have the connections. So I didn't believe in myself. But what Linton did that day is he believed in me, and I borrowed his belief. And I said, absolutely. I thought, this is my shot. This is my way to find out if I can do this. So for the weeks leading up to the day that we had decided on, I was trying to figure out what I was going to say. And I couldn't come up with anything. All the way up until 2 hours before, I was sitting at a Starbucks down the road with a notepad, writing things out, crossing things out, tearing it up, throwing it in the trash, having another cup of tea. And I couldn't figure out what to write, what to say. And it dawned on me that I couldn't do that in a few hours anyway. But I had to do this. I had promised. So I drove to the school. I parked out front. My heart was pounding like this. You ever had that feeling that you've got to do something, and whatever it is, it's got you so nervous that your heart's going to pound out of your chest? That's how I felt. Because I didn't want to blow this chance that I had. I didn't want to blow this opportunity, not because I was afraid of what the students would think. I was afraid of what I would think, that this dream that I had would be crushed because I wouldn't be successful. So I sat outside, and it suddenly dawned on me, Bearj, you've been doing this for years with your students every day. Just go and do the same thing. So I walked into the classroom, and Linton introduced me as a motivational speaker, which was awesome, but really, really weird, because I was a band director. It didn't feel right. It felt clunky, but I went in and I did my thing. The students loved it, and he invited me back to Strayer 3 more times. And still, even after that, I didn't do anything to become a speaker. But the passion was there. Until one day, this was probably 3.5 years ago, I was sitting in an auditorium the second day of school. I was emotionally ensconced in black, mourning the loss of my summer. In the very back of the auditorium, with my phone out, texting my friends who were also there, listening to the speaker that afternoon. There were 350 teachers in the auditorium, and the speaker was talking about something called the Common Core. Have you ever heard of that? She's talking about the Common Core, and one of the things she said was that as students move from elementary school to high school, by the time they get to high school, the amount of fiction to nonfiction is going to be flip-flopped from what the ratio is today. 70% would be nonfiction and 30% fiction. And she asked the audience a question. She said, does anyone have a problem with that? And I realized she was baiting the audience. Most of the people raised their hand, including me. And she said, you're just the people who teach that course. Well, you know, for someone who wants to be a speaker, I wasn't going to stay quiet. And my very outspoken mother was channeling through me at the time. So I stood up. I didn't stand up actually yet. I shouted from the back of the auditorium, no, it's not. And she said, well, you're just one person. And I said, no, I'm just the only person who's speaking up. So I didn't realize it at the time, but about 3 rows back and 4 seats over, the superintendent of schools was sitting there. I had no clue. I really didn't care. And she went on to speak a little bit more. And then she made a fatal flaw. One fatal error. She said, does anyone have anything to say? So I stood up. And I said, I have something to say. In a time when Google, Microsoft, and Apple all want the next new creative thing, the next thing that no one has ever thought of before, we're telling our students you need to be more by the book and less creative. And we're taking the creativity out of school. I have a big, huge, gigantic problem with that. With lots of applause from everyone, they were all for it. And I sat there feeling, this is stupid. This is the dumbest place I could ever be in my whole life. Because they're going backwards and I want to move forward. And it was that day that I realized that I needed to go after what my dream was. So about 3 or 4 weeks later, I had filled out all the paperwork and I had it in an envelope, sealed and addressed to the state to retire. And it was sitting on my desk, and it sat there for another week or 2. And I went home on a Monday afternoon, and on my drive home, I thought, this is it. This is the day I'm retiring. And I don't know how much you know about teaching, but when you retire, they don't let you go back. It's not like baseball. You can't unretire. They don't like that. They frown upon that. So I stood there with my envelope at the mailbox, and I literally thought to myself, when you let go of this, your life will never be the same again. Who I identified myself as was going to be different from this day forward, and I let go, and it dropped in, and that was it. I had set my retirement date as January 1st, 2014, and on January 1st of 2014, when I woke up, I was no longer a teacher. I was no longer a band director. I had to redefine myself and talk about myself in different terms, and it took a while to figure that out. And when people ask me, well, how did you do this? What did it feel like to do that? I tell them, well, it felt like jumping off the top of a skyscraper because I had no idea how to do this. I just knew I wanted to. And making your parachute on the way down. And I'm still making my parachute. Hopefully I'll finish it before I hit the ground. But it makes me think of this one specific quote. When you come to the edge of everything that's light, and you know you need to step into the darkness, one of two things will happen. Either you'll step onto solid ground, or you will be taught to fly. And I tell each of you today, you can fly. You absolutely can fly as long as you believe you can. Thank you.